Welcome to episode 84 of the World Builder's Anvil. Today's topic, how to build a culture. Part 2, we're going to be talking about how Jeff built the Buardrakkeniem Culture.
Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Okay, now welcome back, everyone. And specifically what we'll be talking about today in part 2 will be actually the evolution of the culture, the history of the culture, how they got to where they are now. In the last episode, we talked about the goals and some of the inspirations that led to the culture. And this time we're going to be going more into the evolution of the culture because for me, that's how I naturalistically try and grow a culture where in my first novel that'll be coming out later this year, the Kingdom of Grimbaudus is where the action takes place. But how does the culture get to that location? And in this case, they moved here, and that's sort of a hint, but how do they get to that location, and how does that impact the culture who's at the location?
So how do you want to start it?
Okay, so we'll start off with forced migrations.
So you're talking like when a culture is forced to leave a location.
Correct.
Whether that be to war, a natural disaster, so on and so forth.
Famines.
I was just about to say that, food shortage or water shortage.
Yeah, it could be anything, and it's a common recurring thing in history. And if we go to Europe for a moment,
If we're going to go to Europe, I'd rather stay there longer than just a moment.
No, just a moment.
If you're buying me a ticket to Europe, I really have to put my foot down and say we're staying for longer.
No, just a moment. Okay.
It's not fair.
No, it's not. But so essentially, Europe had a history of steppe tribes invade Europe. And
from where?
From Asia.
From Asia, okay.
Essentially, typically when you talk about the steppes, you're talking about Central Asia. Mm-hmm. Probably the most famous early one would be...
Mongols?
No. The Huns.
That was my next guess.
And that would have been a better one.
Should have been.
The Huns were before the Mongols.
I didn't know that.
You had another major invasion of the Magyars, I believe is how they're pronounced, and they ended up forming what is modern-day Hungary.
Okay.
Then there was which actually was the same place the Huns settled, sort of interestingly. I guess it's a good place for nomads to settle at.
Good farmland, maybe? Fertile place to be?
And it's somewhat surrounded by mountains, too, and I think that was probably part of it as well. Mm-hmm. There's some natural borders there, not natural enough, but natural borders there as well. To the east, which was usually... The reason that would usually happen would there'd be a stronger tribe out to the east. And as it would start growing and becoming more powerful, it would actually push tribes further to the west. Mm-hmm. And so you get this slamming into Europe after probably the time of the Romans. You know, you hear about the period of the barbarian invasions and the Mongols being the most famous of those. It was literally tribes being pushed east by other tribes that were really strong out in the steppes. Yeah.
Well, to jump back to Buardrakkeniem culture for a second, when you say Buardrakkeniem culture, does that refer to give me either a land mass or a people mass or a cultural mass that is a good sized equivalent to the Buardrakkeniem culture? Like, are we talking about a mass of people that would only be like Greece, or a mass of people that would be like the size of the United States? Like the Buardrakkeniem culture encompassed at its... If there's a great variety there, if you need to give me at its lowest and at its highest peak.
Well, we'll start at its lowest peak. Its lowest peak, it's kind of irrelevant, but I really don't know how big the tribe was initially when it started to migrate. Mm-hmm. The original clan started to migrate up towards the arm of the world. But I'd say in the tens of thousands.
Okay. So small town.
So small town. For back then, a large town, but today...
Yeah, but I'm just... To put it in a modern perspective so the listener has an idea of what quantity of people.
So I would say maybe from the size of Windsor, Connecticut to the size of Enfield, Connecticut in population.
Okay, that's great for everyone that lives in Connecticut.
And for everyone else?
Yeah. Yeah. for everyone else, consider 10 to 20,000 people.
We'll have to change the world building task to Googling the size of populations, but probably from 30 to 60,000, maybe a little bit more.
Okay. And then at its largest, how big of a culture?
Well, we'll go from the time period where the first book is going to be set during the Kingdom of Grabatus, which is approaching its peak historically. And I would say you probably have, about 10 to 20 million.
Okay.
So a relatively large population. The culture at this point is...
So that's about the size of a small state in the United States.
Well, you figure I think Connecticut's 3 or 4 million. So it's... yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
See, that's ironic considering that Manhattan is like 8 million.
Yes.
See, that's why I wanted an idea of people and additionally a comparison of landmass, because obviously Manhattan is dramatically smaller than the entire state of Connecticut, and Connecticut, apparently, as far as your population knowledge goes, is a lot smaller.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and I would say landmass-wise, it is roughly, the culture takes up a spot roughly a little bit larger than Western Europe.
Okay.
It's hard to say because it's shaped differently, so I'm trying to mush it in my mind. But
that's fine. Just to give people an idea of what they're thinking about. So at the point of getting back to you were talking about the Huns and the Mongols moving west. When the Buardrakkeniem culture started its big forced migration, because that's what we're talking about how large of a populace were we talking about? So
we're talking somewhere under 100,000.
Okay.
And essentially, they come from the steppe areas in the central part of the main landmass, the only major landmass, the only continental landmass. It's sort of a Pangean continent. So,
okay.
So from the central part there's this area. It's called the land of the purple grass, and
is it literally purple grass?
It's literally purple grass, and the idea is it feeds at night. It's the opposite of grass that you think of. There's a large sort of purple nebula that they're on the edge of the world, and you can see it at night in the night sky, but the sun will block it. But at night, you can see the purple. More of the purple light will reach the ground, and that's actually when this grass is feeding.
Photosynthesis.
It's photosynthesizing off of the nebula, not off of the sun. And it.
Do you want to tell? I don't know if it's an important part of the discussion. I'm just throwing a question out there. Do you want to describe a little what a steppe people is like, or is that not? You don't want to bring that?
No, we'll go in a little bit because that leads to kind of where they are. So essentially, they have to move quickly because there's not a lot of cover. So villages typically transport a lot of wagons early on, a lot of chariots. Then this is a little known fact: early Irish people were a chariot-born people. Did not. A lot of people don't, and essentially,
well, let's define the chariot. Are you talking? It's a wagon with 2 wheels, or it literally is like when you say chariot, I think we all get the Roman gladiator style chariot in mind,
or the pharaoh on the chariot.
You're right. Yeah.
The earlier chariots back when this happened were 4-wheel chariots. Still, they were smaller. They weren't the size of a wagon, but they were actually 4-wheeled. They were much more clumsy, which is probably one of the reasons why. When they settled down, the culture sort of got rid of the chariots because they weren't super useful in that form. However, they did use it to raid and terrorize everywhere from northern India all the way up to Ireland. So it was fundamental. It was probably the Egyptians that I think that were the ones that really broke into the 2-wheel chariot game, which was a lot more light and agile and was a terror weapon of its day. So. But so essentially the big thing is there's a lot of movement around. Your whole village moves essentially nomadically based on the season. So and it's based off of where the, animals you hunt are available at the time. So you sort of follow the herds around much like, other predators might. So there's this small area on the edge of the Worm Range, which is a important area in my world. It's sort of the primordial lost world section of my world. And
lost world as in like dinosaurs?
Yeah.
So you've got creatures there that no one's seen.
That shouldn't be around.
Shouldn't still be around.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they wouldn't be if what was going on there wasn't happening. Essentially, the evolution has been slowed.
I'm going to assume there's magic involved.
There's magic involved, correct. And plus, I get to keep dinosaurs.
Why are there dinosaurs? Because magic, that's why.
Because there has to be dinosaurs, and it makes more sense than that sort of we're taking blood from a mosquito and somehow getting a dinosaur instead of a mosquito. There's this block
of amber that I found.
Exactly.
Not that we both don't love Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park is wonderful, but the idea that you would extract DNA from the mosquito and the amber and you would get a non-mosquito is kind of ridiculous.
Well, no, it's the blood inside the mosquito. It makes perfect sense, Jeff. Weren't you not paying attention to the science lesson inside the movie?
I probably shouldn't have listened to the scientists talking about it afterwards, which kind of...
We all know that that's not true. Okay? We all know that there are mosquitoes out there. They're in amber. They have dino DNA, and they're just waiting to be unlocked and made.
So now, if someone was to wonder where they could learn more about bringing back dead species, is there a place on the internet you'd send them to?
I don't know. Aside to Google or Wikipedia?
I was thinking maybe going by Jurassic Park from garduel.com/Amazon.
Oh, you mean it? Like if they just want to buy the movie?
Yeah, I'm trying to pull you into.
I know what you're trying to do, but you're doing it so ham-fistedly that I wanted to see how much I could get you to struggle.
Yeah, I'm so disappointed here. It's lucky the producer's not around.
Oh no, she'd yell at you because that was sloppy. Because I transitioned that much cleaner than you.
I was trying to help you out there, and you purposefully.
No.
Purposefully.
Because I would have slid into there smoother if you'd have just waited. But you're like a teenage boy at prom night. You just want to hammer it in there. So what Jeff's trying to get to is www.garduel.com/Amazon for all of your home purchasing needs. And if you want to help the show, obviously it's great for us. But it takes you right to Amazon. It doesn't take you to Garduel. It just punches you right to Amazon, and it helps out Garduel. So whatever you want to buy, whether it be a copy of Jurassic Park or our very good friend Dodd Metcalf has a new book coming out called Insidious. It's available October. I can't read today. August 25th. I think you can pre-order it on Amazon now.
You can pre-order on Amazon now. There's also on donmetcalf.com. There's a countdown to it if you want to watch the counter go down. But especially if you're in a young adult romance, this would be a very good series. Obviously, it's fantasy-based, and that's the reason why we're talking about it here.
Of course.
Or speculative fiction. I don't know. I think Dawn would classify her work as fantasy.
And if you haven't been exposed to any of Dawn's work, I highly recommend it because she's twisted in such a lovely way. Mm-hmm. She seems like a perfectly wonderful person to me, but don't trust that. It's a facade. She's very messed up. And her writing reflects that wonderfully. So,
yes,
we're both fans.
We are both big fans of Dawn. But now, getting back to past the Lost World, we're the small nomadic tribe moving around. Now we're not pointing at each other trying to be quiet. We're a small nomadic tribe moving around, and essentially there's another tribe, Citybased, a little bit lower down this major river basin, and they are expanding up the river basin because it's an easy way to mimic a road. You don't have to build a road through your empire if it's a big river. So they're sort of growing up the river towards the purple grasslands, which starts threatening the cultures that live up there. And
i.e.
the Buardrakkeniems, who essentially you have a couple choices. You can stand and fight, which is pretty difficult when you have an expansionist, city-based, slightly more advanced culture growing your direction.
I would have to assume that the city-based culture has blacksmithing and thus metal weaponry, and I would assume the steppe people are not quite there yet.
The steppe people, actually at this point, is probably pre-metal weapons.
Right, so mostly like bows and arrows. And
mostly bows and arrows.
Staffs, maybe.
Staffs, some bone...
Spears?
Stone spears or bone spears.
Okay.
Spear throwers, essentially things to help make the spear go.
Are you talking about the bone thing?
Yeah, you slide the spear into it and you can get more distance. Yeah. That's a pretty early innovation.
And that's actually, I remember watching a thing on, I was the History Channel or whatever, where they were talking about how very common it's like an oddball weapon. Like I've never seen it before.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, yeah, actually this form of weaponry is one of the earliest forms that developed all over the world.
Yeah.
It's basically like, I think the one that they actually showed was literally made from like a human leg bone,
mm-hmm.
where they had carved a slot in the leg bone and made like a handle out where it would meet the knee. So it was like a femur. and or it might even have been some sort of animal bone, because I seem to remember it might have had a curve in it. Mm-hmm. And they would carve a slot, like a track.
Yeah.
Right? And then they would place what, Jeff, you're saying is a spear, but
it's a throwing version.
Yeah. When we say spear, we usually think of a long staff with a blade on the end. Mm-hmm. In this case, we're talking like an arrowhead, a small projectile, sharpened projectile that would slot into this track. And then if you're familiar with lacrosse or highline, like that, you would whip your arm forward and it would give you more leverage to launch this projectile to either hit an animal or a person. So
exactly.
Yeah. So, bow and arrows?
Bow and arrows.
I would think if they're hunting on the steppes.
If they're hunting on the steppes, you kind of need bows. And ironically, one of the first kinds of bows that get developed on Earth, and something I borrowed in Gardul, is recurved bows. The idea that you have different types of woods mashed together in turned in specific directions every time, which will create a very powerful bow that you can then string together and use. Much more powerful for punching power than like even a longbow. Longbows have good range and gravity helps the arrows enter the target, but they have a lot more punching power. Mm-hmm. And I always find it interesting because I think it takes something like 3 or 5 different types of wood in a certain directions to get it to work. And that's what you figure out first. To me, it would be easier to take one big stick but I think part of it is in the steppes, you don't have the common tree sources you would in a wooded area. Mm-hmm. So you're forced to kind of take the wood that you find. Mm-hmm. And humans, being very inventive, find ways to create weapons from this stuff. And that's how you get that kind of bow early on.
Are you familiar with, this thought just came to mind, it's kind of off subject, but there was some old science fiction book that talked about how, just humans and weaponry. We're all about weapons, and there was basically an invasion, a planetary invasion from an alien race that comes to Earth. And I don't know what the time period was on Earth, but it was, firearms had already been developed. So it was, at the very, it was at least in the 16 to 1800s. I think it was a little later than that. We hadn't gotten our space program going yet, but I think we were aware of the potential that there's other life beyond our planet. But anyway, so an alien race lands on a planet. Well, this alien race has a similar intellect level, but all they've done is pour all of their technology development into exploration. They've done nothing for weapons. All they've done, so they got the space race way faster than us. Like, we were not even remotely close to breaching our atmosphere. And meanwhile, they're coming from another planet, and they're like, we're here to invade. They're like, really? With what? And we wipe them all out because we've been playing on killing each other.
No virus
since we started.
needed.
Yeah, exactly. We were all about, creating guns and, projectile weapons. Mm-hmm. How do we kill that thing faster?
That's right.
It's one of our, the human race excels at that.
I wonder, now, I think if I would go that way as a world builder, I would probably take it in the fashion where they were not a carnivore.
I was just about to say that. Yeah. That would probably,
Because that's the thing I think that escalates humans into that space is
the need to kill something to live,
Yeah. And, when you want to bring down giant elephants to eat, you don't want to get close.
Yeah.
Which,
Or even large predators. A large predator, a large mass of protein, good source of strong muscle to eat.
And you have to fight the predator for your turn.
Yeah, if you want to take that muscle away from him, you're going to have to fight that muscle to die.
Yeah, so that's, I think, I don't know if that book would win, but that's how I think as a world builder, I would.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
I was actually going to say something on that.
Yeah. No, so.
You were talking about the more industrialized city expanding up the river where the steppe people were also encroaching in the same space and those cultures meeting.
Mm-hmm. And so
meeting in conflict, I assume.
Yeah, exactly. So you start getting skirmishes and it's not a direct invasion, but you're losing turf to them. So areas that you traditionally used to follow the herds through now have a city on the river, and you're like, what's this? And you try and go past it, and you get into conflict at that point.
So was there ever like a meeting of the minds? I imagine they spoke different languages.
Yes. Oh, completely different languages.
So it's not like they said, hey, listen, the city's getting bigger, so maybe you guys want to move along? Or, hey, do you want to move into the city? It was like, hey, who are all these freakos hunting a buffalo or whatever they were hunting out there?
Well,
what are you guys shooting dinosaurs?
Wow. That guy has a dinosaur mount.
Right.
Wow, that would make a really good figure.
Did you just come up with a new idea? Dinosaur mounted Buardrakkeniem trashing cities across the plains.
So the idea, and probably how the early conflicts would happen are a small fishing village would start to form upriver from the nearest city. And the Buardrakkeniem tribe that would be hunting the area would come through, and they would see this people living there, and they probably would wipe them. They would probably loot the town, kill all of the people, which would probably bring a larger presence of a force up. And so the initial was probably more the Buardrakkeniem. People were probably aggressing the expansions that came forward. And as you realize that you start having conflict, an armed response starts to come from the south. And they're probably, they could communicate a little bit, but it was probably this idea that you're in our way. Mm-hmm. And if you can stay there, but guess what? You will be ours. Mm-hmm. Like the tribe over here, like the tribe over there. We're this growing power. Mm-hmm. You are this flea that have killed some of our people.
And not only that, everything that you're saying is way too complicated because it's not like they're going to pick up on any of that. They're not even speaking the same language. So for them, it's just, crap, there's more people coming. Here comes more, and they're armed guys. They all have swords, so.
There is a level of sophistication. So there was probably, they would figure out how to communicate, and people with natural linguistic abilities would probably start to be able to communicate back and forth between them relatively quickly because humans are meant to communicate. So,
and these are all humans.
The Buardrakkeniem at the time are all humans, and the group down there, the Askari, are also a human tribe.
I think I've heard of that before. I think you mentioned the Askari before.
They were sort of my Persian Empire, the early Persian Empire, with Xerxes sort of expanding all over the world, and they're this kind of threat early on at this point.
Okay, so to go back, at this point, you've got about 100,000 Buardrakkeniem. They're migrating into this area based on herd movement. Mm-hmm. And now they start running into say it again, Askari?
It's Askari.
Askari. S or S? Askari. Okay.
And so essentially they have two choices. They can either be pushed north. The problem there are in the mountains to the north of them are orc tribes. Mm-hmm. And
also there are mountains and there are steppe people.
Yes.
There's also that.
So it's either invading someone on their home turf in a different geographical setting or get pushed in the path of least resistance, which is what they chose. Mm-hmm. And so as their tribes...
Does that mean just going back into the steppes? Or?
That means pushing off into the steppes to the west. Okay. Because you have other steppe tribes that are pretty powerful to the east of them. Mm-hmm. The Askari are at this point growing mainly to the east and along this river basin. So they're being pushed away from the Askari, and instead of into the mountains to where the orcs are, they're being pushed to the west. And there are more steps that way. But the problem becomes as they go south, if they start going southwest, it's more desert area. And that's not something they're familiar with. So they start getting basically pushed along the geography to the north. And they get to a point where essentially, and we talked about this a little bit last time, so I'm only going to briefly cover it this time, where you have this idea where there's this land as they're moving up the arm of the world that is essentially a lot of people want to locate here. Mm-hmm. And other tribes want to go through the mountains to the east because there's another group of mountains there, but with a major pass through it. And they want to go that way. And from the scouts have gone out, this one area that one group wants to settle in is a lot of seawater, a lot of fishing. However, it's somewhat protected because of the mountains. And the other area, once you get to the mountains, it opens up into more plains. So the majority of the people end up going through the mountains to the east, and some split off and become the Umlauten, the holy spearmen, or the holy axemen, I'm sorry, basically settle up here, and those two cultures diverge at this point. So you have a series of cultures based on weapons going to the east, and some of them settling here at this point. Once they start coming through the pass, they're introduced to a new tribe of humans called the Siren. The Siren they were pretty much put together and inspired from old Celtic, north of the Alps, Gaul, Ireland, Britain, sort of hodgepodge of those areas, which we kind of do on Earth too, because we call it Celts. And really the Celts were one group of people near Geneva in Switzerland, but we kind of now say Irish are Celts and Scots are Celts. And the people at the time wouldn't have called themselves that. And actually their neighbors wouldn't have called them that either, but they did have a similar language and a similar culture. So, and in the same way these people are related, they're a bit more tied to the earth. They're different from the humans that they've interacted with so far because they're village based. So they have hunting villages. They have fishing villages. They're more settled. They do hunting around their villages, but agriculture is more important and fishing is more important. And actually another big difference is the Siren are a lunar based belief system, and it's a solar-based belief system that the Buardrakkenims have. Okay. So there's some different thoughts on how the universe works in comparison to each other.
Yeah, I might be talking out my rear on this one. Were the Aztecs lunar-based? You don't know either?
I'm not sure. And I should, because I have researched their astronomy before. Then there are some that do both, where both the lunar and it really comes to what your idea of time is a passage of. The idea of a month is obviously a lunar-based concept.
Right.
And the Buardrakkenim will actually pull that from the Siren, this idea of what a month is. Up to this date, they have no month. They have a year? They have seasons. They have a year, but they do not have a month.
Really? The cycle of the moon was not a concept for them?
The moon is there.
I was about to say, I'm talking about how celestial bodies work on Earth. So for us, a month is a cycle of the moon, and that makes sense. What is the moon like on Gardul?
There are 2 moons in Gardul.
Okay.
There is a relatively large moon, much like ours, like in comparison to the mass of the body. And there's a very small moon, which is actually a very dark rock that does not reflect light. Mm-hmm. And so you can only see the secondary moon.
While it's there, the people on Gardul are probably not aware of it.
Yeah, unless they have sophisticated means to look into the night sky, which at this time most people don't, unless it is in front of the other moon.
And then you'll see a spot.
And you'll see like a moving spot that will occur occasionally across the moon.
Okay.
But it's significantly smaller. It's visible from Earth, but it needs to be silhouetted.
You can see the Gardul's moon from Earth?
Yes. Yes. I can. Most people can't, but I can.
I believe you meant to say Gardul.
Yes.
I just wanted to catch you on.
Yes, thank you.
So the Buardrakkenim people get their concept of a month from the Siren?
The Siren.
The Siren. And the Siren are both, they have village-based, they have fishing culture, they have hunting culture. Agriculture.
Which is a huge difference.
Culture? Did you use that word culture?
Yeah, I just throw it in as much as I can.
Exactly.
Because we're building cultures here.
Of course. But so you're talking about them moving up, them moving back east because of everything going on in the river basin, and then I believe north because the arm of the world is more north.
It's northwest. So they start moving west, and they kind of get to a point, and they probably do have some people who actually do shift to the south. Mm-hmm. But the majority of the tribes move up north, and then when they get up to where the arm starts shifting out west, a group will settle in that area. And the rest of them keep moving west because there's this fear that the Askari are following them, that no matter where you go, the Askari are growing because they're starting at this point to eat up everything around them.
And is that true? Like, were they headed that way or not really?
They weren't rushing in that direction. Mm-hmm. They were actually more focused east, but they were starting to eat up things on this side as well, too. So it's expanding out rapidly.
Okay.
And so there's this fear that they're coming. And there's knowledge that they were an agricultural-based society. So early on, the Buardrakkenim actually feel it's important to figure out how to do this because obviously that gives them some sort of mojo, some sort of power that they did not have. So they
gives them a cultural advantage they didn't have before.
Mm-hmm.
Are the Askari? Are the Askari the largest culture on your planet?
And this time, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And
so, what made you choose the Buardrakkenim for discussion purposes? Just they're a favorite of yours, or
they're a favorite of mine. And in my first novel, it will be The Kingdom of Grabatis is the setting, and that's a Buardrakkeniem culture.
Okay.
So,
is there anything else you want to share about the upcoming novel while we have a moment and you're mentioning it, or are you ready to release the title? Or? No. Okay.
Not until I get it copyrighted.
Fair enough.
But not that I'm worried about someone stealing it. And in theory, someone could have the same name anyway, and there's nothing you can do about it. But I like to wait until I have a cover to share it. I'll probably share it, and it will have that mixed in as well too.
Very cool. Okay.
Yeah. So as they start adopting a lot from the Syrian culture as they settle in, and when I say settle in, it's more of at this point they're like, we have to stop running, and so they start colliding with there's another culture to the south, and the Syrian culture are the two major cultures that they get into conflict with, and they just start eating up land, and they're much more warlike than the cultures that are around there.
The Syrian?
No, the Buardrakkeniem.
The Buardrakkeniem are?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I didn't get that from until you mentioned it just there. I wouldn't have assumed that.
They were a warlike culture. Because when you have these meeting engagements in the steppe, it's usually sort of this idea of, let's make the choice now. Are we attacking them or are we going to talk with them? So, they're much more willing to go to war quickly. Mm-hmm. And at this point, they're like, okay, we can start, we have a technological advantage on this culture here. And where they came from, they were starting to hit the Bronze Age a little bit. So they sort of have metalworking where the Syrian do not. And so they sort of bring the rudimentary metalworking with them. And so they have a huge advantage in war as they start adapting into metal arrowheads, metal weapons. Mm. And the Syrian are sort of really shocked up front and lose huge swaths of land. And all of the local states are very small. It's like local warlords here or there. There's no real great states in the area. There are some a little bit further to the south where bronze working is also starting to creep up, but this area of the world is sort of like right time for the Buardrakkeniem to show up if you want to conquer it. And so they spend the next, initially they just start taking over huge swaths of land and pushing the Syrian back. And when I say that, all the people don't go in these circumstances because there are more settled people. A lot of times the nobles are driven back, but the peasants are left behind. The people who work the land are left behind.
Yeah, because what they're going to do? Yeah.
Exactly. And they start interbreeding, intermixing, and that's where a lot of the Syrian ideas of the current religion start mixing in with the old Buardrakkeniem religion. And it forms a sort of, it's almost like a two-tiered religion. So you have this country religion, which is the Chariot, which deals a lot with agriculture, and the moons become important with that. And the Buardrakkeniem side, which deals more with war and your general pantheon kind of ideas.
Yeah, polytheistic.
Both are polytheistic.
Okay.
And it's very normal for areas to have people who believe in gods of both of the religions.
Because they all serve a different purpose.
And exactly. And especially in the rural areas, farmers never betray their gods easily. And like the whole idea of the word heretic and a lot of the words that we have for that all came from these old words for country folk, for farmers, for country folk. Those lead into the modern words like heretic because they're the people who are the least likely to give up on their beliefs because they believe if they make these sacrifices that the harvest happens. And if they don't make those sacrifices, they don't follow the old ways, they risk not getting food. Mm-hmm. And for farmers, it's a very tough thing to give up. It's very tough to transition them through religion. And so whenever you have a new religion like Christianity peak up, and then within Christianity, like say Islam takes over that Christian area, the areas that make the food are always the last to change. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And this was very much true here. So, more rurally, you will have a lot more Buardrakkeniem and the Kirk religion sort of mixing together, which are what the Kirk being the Syrian religion. And in the cities, when they start creating the power bases, we move on from that. We go beyond that. So as you start having these cultures mixed together, mainly in the rural areas, In the cities, you have more of a traditional Buardrakkeniem view of what their religion is and those power bases. In those power bases, you have So in the cities, you have more of this traditional Buardrakkeniem view, or what is considered traditional at that point of view, come in. And then in different areas, you start having small states forming, much like the Syrian were, but this time it's Buardrakkeniem nobles in charge. And the people, we're Buardrakkeniem, just don't kill us. We'll give you a part of our food, leave us alone. Situation starting to grow up.
What was a Buardrakkeniem noble at that point? Like chieftains? That's what I would think.
Yeah.
What you're describing.
It's probably like still pre-feudalism at this point, pre the idea of larger states. And it's largely because it's very difficult, for supply reasons and food reasons to be able to grow your base beyond, too large of a spot. But in many other parts of the world around major rivers where the land's more fertile, more powerful states start to grow up. One of which, and sort of iconically becoming sort of the first Buardrakkeniem state, would be Buardrakis itself, which was a kingdom formed. It was a republic kingdom where the king was elected by the other nobles. Essentially, it was an oligarchy, but they would elect one your king, and his job was to deal with war and the executive powers of the state, and he could pass laws and stuff like that. Some of it would have to go in front of the other nobles. It wasn't an absolute state by any stretch of the imagination.
So he didn't have the power of executive orders.
He did, but they would have the power to ignore him because he needed the power to go after them. And mainly the way the taxes would work is the king had his core land, and he would then have the nobles give him a little bit of a stipend to help ensure that he could help protect them in case there was a war with someone outside of their state. And sort of this is also the kind of the backbone that will grow into a feudalistic system later on. The one significant growth was there was massive problems with corruption in the Buardrakkeniem kingdoms. And there were a few other states, the Kingdom of Lubbel and a few other ones that kind of grew around the same time that were also Buardrakkeniem states. The major takeaway, in the legacy of the culture was these were very corrupt times. When I became king, I would eliminate some dukes and I would get family members into their homes, and you start to have that kind of struggle that is more traditional that people think of in monarchies, but in a much more uncontrolled time. Where, you would send in, your bodyguard and literally just wipe out a castle, very subtle. That was with air quotes for the people who can't see me. But not very subtle means. And there's a lot of infighting among the great noble houses in the area. And to follow us up, at the time the Askari are still growing and pushing, they've really sort of taken a big chunk of the east out. They've started to approach the inner sea to the southwest of where the Buardrakkeniem started from. They're pushing north into the mountains at this point, which is now starting to cause a secondary migration, which is the Orc tribes are split in half. Some are forced to the northeast, and that was a lot of the steppe ones. And a lot of the ones from the mountains are actually pushed off to the northwest towards where the Buardrakkeniem went. We will cut off here at this point, and we will get more into the Orc invasions in the next episode.
So, a quick wrap up. You can have your people migrate for... it sounds like this migration just started out as their standard yearly migration based on, hunting and seasonal change and what have you, and then turned into a cultural necessity based on the expansion of another culture. And that, in turn, as is the point of talking about all this on the show, completely changes the story, changes the culture, changes the cultural landscape and the physical landscape, because you've got cities developing along rivers. This pushes a whole, mass culture of people. You're talking like 100,000 people from point A to point B that then encroaches on other cultures, taking over the fishing, the Syrian?
The Syrian, yeah.
Taking over the Syrian in that area and what have you. And then deciding, okay, this is our new home. Everybody settle down, drop the tents.
That's right.
And
ironically, The reason the migration starts is you don't want to get sucked into losing your traditional values. But then you end up adopting very similar types of values of farming as in an urban-based society to try and counterbalance this thing that forced you to leave in the first place. So there's a bit of irony with the way these things work out.
A little hypocrisy on the execution. So before we wrap it up, we have a world builder's task of the day.
Yeah. So the idea of the task is to take a culture and the story you're working on or from your world and sit there and go, how did they get to where they are? Did they start there? Did they move there? Who do they interact with? Who else in the world do they interact with on the way? What are differences in food and geography from the time they changed? Because cultures will settle in and use the foods of the area they're in, which I think it makes perfect sense.
That's kind of obvious.
But you can also have these link backs to certain kinds of things that might be held in a high religious belief that are very hard to get where you're at because they've moved. And Buardrakkenim in particular, this idea of purple grass is very important. Because that's the homeland. That's where we're from. And the irony is probably, I'm not going to go into that, but it becomes very hard to get purple grass going into the future.
Okay. This was all part of the World Builder's task. Mm-hmm. So basically what you're saying is if you haven't already established it, create a backstory for the main culture in either your world or the story you're creating if you're writing a story.
Exactly. And take ideas of how they've moved and incorporate that into the cultural belief system, the cultural identity of the people.
Or if they haven't moved, why haven't they moved, and what has evolved their culture in the back? Like if you're writing in a specific point in time, what brought them to that point in time?
Or you could do the opposite, where you have Assyrian-like people who get invaded by the Buardrakkenim, repel them, but what is the impact that's left on that culture? Do they absorb in the refugees? The people who were defeated? Who knows? There are different ways you can play it, but the idea is to just evolve a culture from a historical standpoint, but then keep in mind while you're doing that is you're taking certain beliefs out. And when we get to the end of how to build a culture, we'll start talking about some of the specific Buardrakkenim beliefs, and we will actually talk about where they came from in the history. And that's why we're spending time going over the history. Plus, it's a story, and I like telling stories.
I wouldn't have guessed that. So what about the real world task of the day?
Okay. One of the tough things, if you're like me, or you want to start sharing more of your stories, or maybe you want to get back and do more role-playing as a game master, is you start running out of time once you get a family and a job. It's weird how that eats up a lot of time.
I know. It so gets in the way of all my fiction love.
So one of the things I like to do is I use getting things done ideas, this idea of getting things done. And there's a whole movement behind it.
Larry the Cable Guy? Get her done.
Get her done. Maybe he started it, but essentially, there's a book called "Getting Things Done: The Art of Stress-Free Productivity" by David Allen, and I'll put a link to it in the show notes. But it's a way to alleviate your stress and let you get to the things that you want to have more time for, but you either create an excuse that I don't have time for, or not. And
this task this is a 1 hour task. I can't do anything about this task because if I'm going to take this task on, it takes an hour to do it.
Exactly.
So I can't do it because I don't have an hour. I've only got 15 minutes.
Yeah. And so, that's a good point, because when you have the 15 minutes, what you do is when you create a list of tasks that you need to get done, you have these things that you need to get done next. Like for me, I have to finish up editing. I have to finally pick a person to do the cover for my book. I have those, but those are bigger, longer tasks. I also have a list of 15-minute tasks, and I fall back on those when I get done with a major task, or I get off of work and I'm like, I only have 15 minutes. Instead of going to Facebook for 15 minutes, I actually go to this list and I say, okay, well, I can't get all of the editing in the world done today, but what I can do is I can get an email set up for my email newsletter. Or I can put up a few more things into social media to be shared out at some later point.
The point being is you've got 15 minutes. you can take advantage of that 15 minutes instead of wasting that 15 minutes on some stupid, looking on Facebook or getting on MSN or whatever.
Or even worse, a Facebook game, which can suck your life right out of you, and you really aren't enjoying it. At least I don't. Yeah, right. There are very few of them I actually enjoy.
Join my Farmville game.
That's right.
Buy my produce on Farmville.
Could you please come to my farm and click on my cow? No.
No, thanks.
But just have a fallback list of...
I click on real cows.
And that could be one of your tasks, to click on my cow.
Go click on a real cow.
Go click on...
You're real well.
Don't tip them.
Don't. I'm told that's a total fallacy. That
it
no
is?
one has ever tipped over a cow.
I wouldn't
cows
try.
Don't sleep standing up. They lay down. And you can't tip them over. It's just...
Wow. So we're here today with Mike the Buzzkill. Oh, I'm sorry, Michael.
Michael. You actually caught that. I didn't. If you are going to go waste 15 minutes and you're not going to be productive, it's not what we're recommending. But if you're going to, let me point two things out. Go check out College Humor on YouTube. There's a thing called Ben Ruins Everything. And it's basically this guy, Ben, with facts. They do the research on whatever the subject is. They pick a subject and then they have a brief scenario where somebody is within the context of the subject, and then he comes in and completely ruins everything they think about it, it's really fun. So check out Ben Ruins Everything. And if you're a video game nerd like myself, go check out Dorkly on YouTube and look at any one of the videos that Dorkly does. Type in Dorkly bits and you'll get all kinds of really great hysterical videos on that. So if you want to be productive, start a list of 15-minute tasks. Break down whatever your big goal is right now into 15-minute chunks, so that when you have a free 15 minutes, there's no excuse. You're going to go to that list and you're going to pick something and you're going to do it. If you don't feel like being productive, go take a look at our suggestions on YouTube. Obviously, we can't recommend highly enough that you go to www.garduel.com/Amazon and get Dawn Metcalf's new book, Insidious, or Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity by David Allen.
All right. And the tease for next episode is part 3 of How to Build a Culture. We'll be finishing up the, brief history of the Buardrakkeniem culture, leading towards the formation of the Kingdom of Garbatus, which will be the setting for my first novel. And we'll start taking some of the actual beliefs, and I'll go back to where they grabbed them from the history of the culture. So these 2 episodes, that's why they're in parts. So they do build off of each other, but definitely look forward to that next week. And as always, make sure to go to garduel.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under Podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at garduel.com, to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike, while the myth rolls high.